The first thing before we start implementing any Houdini work is to try and analyze a couple of real references to understand the scale, the speed, and the motion, and also start thinking about how we're going to approach this problem. Now, in this type of scenarios where you have ocean or a lake or anything that is coming through in a big wave and hitting an object, most of the visual that we're looking at is not an actual water. It is water, but it's made of mist and particles. And in CG, we can replicate this using points and volumes. And when looking at the splash itself, there's not a lot of water surface. There's pretty much no water surface visible at that point. It's mainly mist and particles. And once we understand this, we're going to be able to separate how to achieve each of these two things. For example, when we have a character or a spaceship rising from the ocean, that spaceship is going to drag a lot of actual water surface with it. So we will have to create a sim that capture all those details as a geometry surface. But in this case, most of the visual is coming from the splash and the mist, and that's what we need to focus on. We need to create an interesting whitewater sim, basically, or something that uses points and render that as points to get the visual mist look. And so once we clarify this, once we understand this idea that it's not always about the main flip fluid, a lot of times there is visual aspects that can be achieved using other methods that are not flip fluid related. You can use particles, you can use volumes, you can use actual smoke sims, and in this case we're going to use the whitewater solver or the new whitewater solver. And looking at these splash, we have an incoming source, basically water coming in, and then it's going to hit something. That whatever that collision object is, it's going to start pushing the water in a different direction or upward and splitting it into a lot of finer clusters. And those clusters will then start to separate more and more and get lighter, and the lighter they become, the more they can be affected by air, field, and wind. And the main visual look that we're going to be aiming for is, if we look at this area here, we're going to see the splash coming in, and then it's going to start with big clumps that they will separate and become finer and finer and finer. See this part here? Everything is going into basically the finest detail it can be. And that's a very, very important aspect of the splash itself. It's happening on all of these, and that's the main criteria. The first part is the emission, okay? And that's where the flip fluid sim is going to come in. We're going to create the flip fluid sim and use that as an emission for the whitewater sim. But most of this visual that you're seeing here is 100% whitewater. We're only using the flip fluid sim to as an emitter for this guy. And so here I have a couple of renders of different wedges, and this one is showing a technique to add an extra force by analyzing the stiffness and applying wind based on that. So let me increase this. You can see where we have the clustering feature. You can see we started off with a big clump, and then it's going to continue to separate and separate and separate, and that amount is different in each one of them. And also, as they separate more and more, they're going to start getting affected by the wind. So none of these things are available in Houdini by default. So we have to analyze the visual and then say, okay, how can we implement these techniques? How we can achieve this visual? And that's what we're going to do in this week. Then this is another test as well, testing extra force applied to various areas of the sim. And as you can see, we're getting completely different look here. It's a different amount. You can see here it's a very different look where you have clustering, and this one does not have clustering. And at this point, for me, I like all of them. It's really a matter of artistic decision on which one you want to go with. There's probably some right and wrong in them, but what matters the most is the visual. And again, if you pick this one, I'm not going to say it's not right, nor this one. Both of them are perfectly correct to use, and it's really up to the artistic direction that you're receiving. And so we're gonna look at implementing all this, do various wedges, and set up. First, we're gonna set up the flip fluid and talk about all the entire workflow and some advanced meshing technique, even though we're not going to render the mesh in this case. As you can see, it's only particle and volume, and we're going to use this opportunity to show some advanced techniques for meshing to get some really high-res details in the mesh and very stable and without any flickering. And this technique can be applied to many other use cases. Okay, so let's get started. First, we're going to set up the scene, the simple scene, and get the flip fluid main sim working, and then we'll continue from there. Thank you guys for watching, and talk to you soon. Bye bye.